So we're doing Lesson 13 in the quarterly Present Truth in Deuteronomy, and the title is The Resurrection of Moses. And we're going to look at Sunday's lesson. We'll come back to the Sabbath lesson, but we're going to look at Sunday's lesson first. And the first paragraph says, time and again, even amid their apostasy and wilderness wanderings, God miraculously provided for the children of Israel. That is, however undeserving they were, and often remained that way, God's grace flowed out to them. We too today are recipients of his grace, however much we are undeserving of it as well. After all, it wouldn't be grace if we deserved it, would it? I hate this wording. I always like to reword this. The aspect, it wouldn't be grace if we deserved it. I find it to be very poorly worded. Grace is an outflow of graciousness. What grace is, the outflow of graciousness. God is gracious. Did Jesus deserve grace when he grew in wisdom and stature and grace with God and man? The Greek word is grace, but they translate it favor. Same word. Did he deserve it? Didn't deserve it. Deserve doesn't really apply. He grew in wisdom and favor, or wisdom and grace. Okay, to the degree that the authors mean that we don't have a right to it. We didn't make it or create it or earn it as a wage in some way. That's correct. That's absolutely correct if that's what they mean. But do sinless angels earn it? I wonder what they would say if we said, what about Gabriel? Does Gabriel deserve God's grace? Is he deserving? Or would they say, well, he doesn't need grace. Grace is only something that people who sin need. Sinless beings don't need grace. Then back to Jesus. Jesus grew in wisdom and grace. He didn't need it? Would God be less gracious to sinless angels than to sinners? Or is he still gracious? Or is it as Paul wrote, where sin abounds, grace much more abounds? So is it that there's some different aspect of grace, or there's some different aspect of our condition that requires a greater outflow of grace? You see what I'm saying now? We need more grace, but God is just as gracious to the sinless beings. It isn't that grace isn't being poured out on all the creatures in God's creation, because God is gracious, and that's what he does. It's that our sin presents a situation where God's grace is magnified or has more work to do than in those who are not in a state of sin. So I think I would rather do, instead of unmerited, if I had to use a word similar, I would use unearned. And unearned. And that would then be still true for the angels. God's grace is also unearned by them. Do you like that better? Yeah. And so when we understand that God's grace is always an outflow of God's graciousness, and we don't earn it, whether we're sinners or sinless, we don't earn it, it's God's grace, then it leads us to a humble attitude of thankfulness. We're so thankful that God's so gracious. Yes?
Isn't God gracious to the unrighteous as well?
Yes, yes.
Providing them life and health and
and consequences for their sin that causes pain, which is an act of grace to lead them, hopefully, to realize that that path is a destructive path before it's too late. That's also grace. So the problem with the undeserving or the unmerited language is it seems to focus the attention on us and our sins rather than on God and his character. We are undeserving because we've sinned, and we're bad, and we're no good, and we're corrupt, and we don't deserve anything good. We're worms. That's kind of what the undeserving and unmerited language tends to at least trigger in my mind, and it's the way it's been presented. And I think when we do the unearned aspect, it turns our focus back on, we didn't earn it, but God so gives it.